excited. It's been so
I
long, and
know.
I think sometimes things happen for a reason, because I was meant to interview you now with the 100th anniversary coming up and the fact that I'm going to Japan and all of that. So I'm so excited to have you here because of that.
Awesome. And thank you for
And
hosting. I'm really, really looking forward to it. It's been ages since I've done a podcast, and it's lovely to do it with someone I like so much. So it makes it all the more fun.
Oh, well, thank you. Thank you. And yes, I hear you're going to New York, so this is the perfect time. Now, I was going to have you go through your whole history, but then I thought people can read about it online, they can listen to it on some of your other podcasts that you've done. And I think that I also want it to be really fun for you as well. And I think that listening to some of the other things that you've spoken about, two things came to mind. And I think hopefully those two kind of concepts will join into one. And I've heard you talk about being the perfect host, how to be the perfect host. And I'd love you to talk about that as well. But we're going to do an introduction, but these are just a couple of the things. And then also how you got to fall in love with Japan and work for a Japanese company, and then talk about that Japanese company a little bit.
Cool.
So before we do all of that, first, why don't you tell everyone who you are and just a little bit about your history? And I'm sure I'll interrupt like 1,000 times.
The introductions help because I hate talking about myself. So if you can guide me, that's wonderful.
Sure.
So yeah, obviously my name's James Bowker. I work for the House of Suntory, so I'm the Global Advocacy Manager, which is a job title that's sort of meaningless, but it means I have the incredible privilege of working with one of my favourite spirits companies in a culture that I absolutely adore, and explain to people around the world what makes it unique, what makes it different, what makes it exciting. So really I'm responsible for storytelling and education for the House of Suntory.
Fabulous. Now, it wouldn't be Lush Life if we didn't go a little bit all the way back. Can you tell me where you were born and kind of your just early bits of drinking, I guess, like cocktails at home? Did you like any of that? Your first jobs working with drinks?
Of course, yeah. So I grew up in a small village in the countryside in Milton Keynes, which is not the most glamorous of places. Anyone listening will be able to tell by my accent that I'm British. And so just picture your typical English countryside village. And there wasn't much in terms of a drinking culture there besides the local pub. And actually, when I was a child, the local pub closed. So we had to walk a full mile through country roads before you would eventually find the nearest pub. And so when I was about 15 years old, I had the chance to go and start working in that local pub. And just as soon as I got there, I fell in love with the atmosphere of communal drinking spaces. There's something really special about a community space where people come together. They come from all different walks of life. They share stories, they help each other get through hard times, but they also have fun, have a really good time together. And so I'd grown up in a church-going family, and I'd fallen out of love eventually with the world of the church, but the pub felt similar to that in a way. It felt like it was just a place that people had that sense of community and coming together. And so, yeah, I worked initially, of course, doing kind of glass collection and working in the kitchen, chopping salads and so on and so forth, always, though, with an eye towards the bar. And I'd basically, since childhood, had this reputation in my family of being the slightly snooty one when it comes to flavour. So when we had Christmases and all that sort of thing, everyone would have all the different sweets that you would get in your stockings, and most of my family would be really falling in love with traditional Cadbury dairy milk chocolates, and my mum would always get something a little bit nicer, like a Lindor or Gillian or something like that, and I was always the one that would be trying to sneak chocolates from my mum because they were the better tasting ones. And that basically played through into, as soon as I got into working in this hospitality environment, was I knew that I just had this weird obsession with flavour. There was something about the taste of things that excited me, that really inspired me. And so I moved as soon as possible, as quickly as possible, away from the bar backing and away from the glass washing and towards where I could taste things. And as though we had a fancy pants Michelin chef, that wasn't going to be the kitchen. And what it meant was I got behind the bar super early on.
Now, did you ever cook at home? Did you ever explore flavors that way?
Oh, of course. I'm obsessed with cooking. It's, to be honest, the main way that I'll relax is cooking myself fresh food. I've never really been a health conscious person, but I am aware of like just how bad for you stuff you get from the shops is. And so it's always something that me and my partner will do, is just host friends every night we can, bring people in because it's horrible cooking for yourself, and just get a group together and cook awesome foods. That's something I'm doing regularly.
And did that start as a child?
Yeah.
I mean, when you were already always in the kitchen.
Oh yeah, I did
doing
some weird
yeah.
things when I was a kid. Like I was always very experimental. I remember one day I wanted to cook something, and for whatever reason, for a good reason, I wasn't able to cook a dinner. So I was like, okay, well, I'll make some sort of pudding. And the only thing we had was like tangerines and digestive biscuits, which are very plain, bland biscuits. And I like caramelized off these digestive biscuits and tried to make like a syrup with the tangerines. And to be honest, I remember it tasting really not very good, but it's a core memory of being like, well, it doesn't matter, I'll just find what I've got and I'll make something with it. So yeah, that was how things started. And then I basically, as soon as I got behind the bar in this pub, I learned that actually there was this side of things that was fun in terms of how we just serve people, so serving pints and having a good time with people. There was the other side that we didn't really do at the pub, which is cocktails. And I'd heard that a lot of the younger people in the community, the village that I was living in, were going into town because that was where they could have mixed drinks and cocktails. And I thought, well, this is a shame. And these things sound really tasty, really good fun. So I got a cocktail book. I think it was like Difford's Guide or some sort of general cocktail book. I just started mixing things. And I remember the first one I tried was an old fashioned. I made it with, I can't even remember what bourbon it was. And I had a sip and it was awful. Absolutely horrible.
Oh.
And I think the reason for that was I was too young to really understand stirred down cocktails. They weren't something my palate was prepared for. I was still only just turned 18 at this stage. And so I just started experimenting more and more, and eventually got the luck that the landlord just trusted me. And we had this chalkboard right opposite the bar, and I just every week put on a few cocktails that I was experimenting with, and mostly it was tiki drinks because that was the fruity, fun side of cocktails that people in a random village in the English countryside could get behind.
Of course, who doesn't like a mojito and who doesn't like, pina colada? So I understand that.
Right, exactly.
Now, while you were doing this, I understand from knowing you that you were also studying at the same time. Now, was this always working at the bar just for fun? And, you thought, oh, it's just a little thing on the side because I'm studying?
Basically, it was just a need for cash. I growing up in the countryside, I always wanted to be in town to visit girlfriends or see my mates or whatever it would be. And the bus service was pretty poor. I didn't want to cycle all the time, so I needed taxi money. That's why I started off in the pub. As soon as I went to university, I moved from the countryside to the second largest city in the UK, which is called Birmingham, and just basically knew that I'd need to make money. I don't come from a family that just throws cash every month at you so you just have the life of luxury while you're at university. It's like, no, you work hard, you find your way. And so I found a great bar. I talked to friends during the first couple of weeks of university, asked where the best place was in town, went to visit, fell in love. It was a typical, that kind of era of 2010, 2011 sort of time. It was all speakeasies, Victoriana, etc., etc. Cute little place called the Jekyll and Hyde, which just at that period was winning, I think, the best gin bar in Europe or something like that. Certainly best cocktail menu in the UK, I remember us winning. And I was like, okay, this seems like a place to learn. And just very luckily, they offered me a job. I went in there cocky as anything, kind of perched at the bar. I was like, this is exciting, this is cool. Can I do this? I had no real idea what I was getting into, but something in the passion that I was obviously showing gave me an interview, and yeah, got through. I remember the hardest question he gave me, a guy called Carl Hawkins, who to this day is someone that I've got so much respect for. And he just sat me down. He's like, right, well, you don't know very much about cocktails. You've not got much experience. You're very young. You also look much younger than you are, so it's going to be an interesting one. But if I gave you this really difficult round, what order would you make those drinks in so they all came out at the same time? And from what I understand, some of the other interviewees had never worked in a pub and understood how long it would take you to pour a Guinness or go and change the barrel downstairs. And so that one question of being able to work out what is the right order to give great service got me in the door. And from there, it's been a spiral.
When you interview people, do you whip out that question?
Yeah, quite often. The hardest interviews I've ever done have always stuck with me, because I think if you can prove yourself that you can hold your cool, hold your head in an interview situation when you're being thrown difficult questions, that's perfect preparation for when you're 4 deep behind the bar and there's that person propping up the counter and asking you something difficult about cocktail history. If you can stay cool and provide a good answer there, you're grand.
You're grand, yes. Now, again, I bring back your studies because you didn't just do a Bachelor of BA, a Bachelor of Arts, an MA, but you were going for a PhD. I mean, that's serious. That's wanting to be a professor. You're going to be a doctor of something. I know that it's, sorry, I'm answering your own questions. Sorry.
That's okay.
Politics, philosophy, etc. Now, Was this something that, like, in your family, you had to go to university, you had to prove something, this is what you know, were going to do, and you had this other side of you that was tugging? I mean, what was that war like inside of you? How did you decide which side to take, you know, the angel or the devil?
It's a good question. I think from all of my life, I'd kind of been not a goody two shoes per se, but I'd always been someone that was like good at school. You know, I'd have fun and mess around, but I was always like kind of on track to have a good life. Not because my family came from anything special, but just because I was getting great grades and I got along with everyone, and so it allows you to progress through various, you know, academic bits. And so I'd done really well in my GCSEs, which is like the exams you do when you're 16. I got some crazy high scores, got very cocky, and then didn't work at all for my A-levels, which is the kind of, I think it's like equivalent to the SATs or something in the States. And so basically didn't do so well in those exams. Went to university and just was like, a big part of my identity is built on being the smartest guy in the room. Like that's who I am. And I failed at my last exams. I need to do well. I need to prove to myself that I've got something to offer here. And I really felt this pressure because going from a small country town to this huge, big city, I'm suddenly introduced to people from all walks of life that I'd never met before. There's a couple of people, you know, the guy called Bryn Goff, a woman called Amanda Morgan, that were just so smart. I'd never met people this intelligent before. And I was like, oh, I need to be able to compete with these people. This is so tricky. And so I just put all of my effort into having a great time, of course, but doing well, proving to myself that that blip of my sixth form experience wasn't going to mark my life in any way. And so I got really good results. I was really lucky to get the highest score in my year at my undergrad, and then got the funding to do my PhD, and again, to do my master's. Again, got the highest score. And I was like, okay, clearly there's something in this. I'm really enjoying it. I'm getting good results. My professors love me. Maybe this should be my career. And so at that stage I was kind of split, because I was loving what I was doing in hospitality. By that stage I'd been headhunted away from the gin bar I'd mentioned earlier, Jekyll and Hyde, and moved over to a posh fancy pants, you know, luxury hotel bar. And that place was amazing. The Edgbaston had, you know, we had nearly 1,000 spirits on the back bar. We had this huge old school cocktail menu with like 80 drinks in there, plus 100 odd classics. Just a wild place to really upskill myself. We had some incredible mentors there, from the owner, a guy called Darren, who'd worked in New Orleans, through to a bunch of other incredible bartenders. And I was like, I'm obsessed with this academia and what I'm learning about the world. I had this real sense of caring about justice in the world, and wanting to work in that space of how we take academic philosophy and politics and apply it to the real world. But at the same time being in this state of discovery, I suppose, this realization there's a whole world that I'd never been aware of. I'd never experienced luxury until working in that place. I'd never experienced, you know, any country outside of Britain and France. And suddenly I'm exposed to all of this stuff. And like, where do I go from here? And so I then got, what happened next? I'm kind of muddling my own story. So then I decided to what was it? I think I decided to commit. That was it. I decided after my master's degree that I would commit a year to hospitality. And then just as I started that year of commitment, I got this kind of bar management role. It was all going really, really well. Suddenly, the university that I used to be at came to me and they're like, well, we've actually decided that we would like to entirely fund you to do a PhD, which is a super rare, it's just such a privilege to get given an offer like that. And it was not just funding the studies, it would offer a salary alongside that. And that just so rarely comes up that I was like, well, that's not something you can turn down, because it was sponsored by an organisation that I had huge respect for called the Tax Justice Network. And all of my side of me that cared about changing the world and wanting to give back in some way was just suddenly turned on by the possibility, because what the Tax Justice Network do is they look at corporate tax avoidance and they try and provide, well, all sorts of things, but in this instance, they try and provide research that helps to come up with new policy or question the way that things are currently policed, to make sure that we do get more tax income into countries and these corporations can't just avoid huge amounts of tax. I was like, okay, that's a cool opportunity. And even though you told yourself you were going to commit to bartending for a year, even though you told yourself you wanted to travel and do all of that, this doesn't come up very often. So I decided to try it. And for the final year of my undergrad, the whole of my master's, the first year of my PhD, I was doing those studies full time and working full time in an award-winning cocktail bar, and, you know, entering competitions and having some success myself. And it was one of the hardest things that I've ever done. And I just had this is 2015, I think, or 2000, it must have been 2016 because of Brexit. I had this awful year where I think it was the year my grandfather died. I was like completely in love with someone who like broke it off in a way that felt really painful. And Brexit happened. And Brexit hit me really hard because I was teaching undergraduate students as part of my PhD, international politics, economics and philosophy. And these kids were mostly European students, not British students. And when it was, I remember so clearly, I didn't believe it was going to happen. I was, campaigning, door knocking, trying to stop Brexit from happening. Woke up, turn on my phone, first thing you see, it's gone through, fine. Go to class, and I had 4 students in one day break down in tears during seminars. And it just broke my heart, to be honest. I felt completely alienated from, some people in my family that had voted a certain way, friends of mine, and just the country in general. I felt like my identity as being a European young man wasn't something that was respected. I felt that I was living in a country that was going a way that wasn't the way that I wanted to see it go. And then all this other heartbreak had happened in my personal life. And I was like, you know what? I just need a break. I need to...
You're like, screw it. I'm getting behind the bar and making a drink. Damn it. I need a drink.
Flip the desk, say academia is not the thing for me. I'd also just realised that like I was never going to be the guy that sits in an ivory tower somewhere researching some minutiae of some policy. It was desperately boring. The people were, they were all from a very particular background, which wasn't a background that I shared or had any sympathy for. And I wanted to be amongst real people. I'd had a taste of what real people were like working in hospitality, honest, decent people that had all sorts of diverse backgrounds. And so I just was like, right, I'm leaving. I posted on Facebook, does anyone have a job in Asia? And a friend of mine came back to me and she was like, James, you've always loved Japanese whiskey. You're obsessed with Japanese bartending. Why are you saying Asia? You should say more specifically that you want to work in Japan. And I was like, well, I don't know anyone in Japan. And everyone knows how this industry works. If you have a connection, you're great, right? You're in. If you don't know anyone, it's so hard to get in the door. And so she said, okay, leave it with me. I'll see if I can connect you with anyone. And I didn't really think of anything else of it. And literally the very next day, I had an unknown number call my phone. I pick up, hello, and say, is this James? Yep, this is James. How can I help? So have you heard of Bar High Five in Tokyo? Yep, of course I've heard of it. It's a place that I revere. So this is Ueno. I own Bar High Five. I hear you're very good. Do you want to come and work for me? I was like, oh, okay.
You're like, yeah, I'm on the next plane.
When do you need me? And he said, when can you be there? And I remember opening up my my laptop and going, right, 2 weeks. So that same exact day, I quit my PhD. I talked to my housemate and got out of my rental agreement. I quit my job and booked my flights all in one day. And 2 weeks later, I was in Tokyo. So that was the next stage.
Now, just to just unpack that or go back a little bit, you said you always had a love of Japanese whiskey. Yeah. Where did that love come from, and why Japan right away?
So, I mean, it wasn't because of Japan initially, it was because of that obsession with flavour. So I remember that first pub that I worked in that I mentioned earlier, we had this incredibly posh restaurant as part of the pub, and it was really a Jekyll and Hyde experience. I worked in a bar called the Jekyll and Hyde, but even before that, the pub, the navigation was Jekyll and Hyde, because it had this kind of rough and ready English pub. And next to it, as part of the same business, was a restaurant that was aspiring for its first Michelin star. And as a consequence, we had an amazing wine list and an amazing spirits collection. And the landlord, a guy called Duncan, was super friendly and super supportive of my passion. And so he just let me taste whatever wine's like. As long as you sell a dram, you can have a dram. So I got to taste dozens of whiskies from all over the world. And the first one that I can honestly say I enjoyed was a random bottle of Yamazaki 10-year-old that he just happened to have. And I have no idea where he got it from, because it's not something that was super common in Milton Keynes. But I just remember tasting it and being like, okay, it's possible for a spirit at 40% ABV to be palatable, which at 18 years old, I hadn't really experienced that before. I'd always found these spirits too much.
I'm just going to interrupt you one sec. Now, do you think it was because I'm sure it was because we all know that it's fabulous and it tastes fantastic, but do you also think that it's because you were meant to taste that at that time, as in you had tried that first old fashioned and it wasn't very good, you weren't used to it, and your palate just became a little bit more in tune to the possibility of, whiskeys or bourbon, and then all of a sudden, boom, this was the the eureka moment of, yes, this is what it's meant to be.
Right. I think there's something in that. I mean, I've never been one to believe in like any form of fate or kind of meaning in anything, but I definitely had prepared my palate because I was tasting all sorts of spirits, rums, gins, whiskies, cognacs every day. And I think I was just crying out to taste something where I was like, A, there's good flavor in here. B, there's complexity in here. And I'd actually experienced both of those things where I'd taken a sip of whiskey and been like, oh, I can see that it's good. I can see that it's complex, but I hadn't liked it. And so what I was crying out for was something that ticks the, good flavor complexity boxes and felt palatable. And something that is true for Japanese whiskies is that generally speaking, they are softer. They're a bit more delicate, frankly, than whiskies you find in Scotland. And so I think when I tasted that, I was like, as you say, eureka. I've got flavor, I've got complexity, but also I can sip this and not put a face. And so that was that first inkling that this was a category that I would fall in love with. And it grew from there, to be honest.
All right, so now you're on that airplane to Japan. What was that first experience working at Bar 5?
Amazing, terrifying, and intense. So I was working.
Was it what you thought it was going to be? I mean, did you have any ideas beforehand? This is the way I think it's going to be. And then you were like, whoa, no.
So firstly,
or yes.
There were some things that were exactly as I'd expected, and some things that were very different. So I'd obviously, coming from, by that point, I'd been lucky to, win some cocktail competitions, have some various awards that I'd won privately, and the bar had won for various things, menus, cocktails, whatever. And so I was coming at it being like, I've competed in the Diageo World UK finals 3 years running, blah, blah, blah. I know what I'm doing. They'll let me make drinks. And the reality is you don't really make many drinks when you're doing an apprenticeship out in Japan. It's more about watching, learning, understanding the culture. So I definitely thought I would get more practical experience of making cocktails. I didn't get that. But what I did get was just a masterclass in how to host people, how to look after people, and the little details of balance, of harmony, of hospitality that I think in a lot of Western bars we're so busy all the time. And we're so focused on the next cocktail menu, the next competition, the next whatever, that those little nitty-bitty details, you just don't have the mental headspace to think about. And so I really got such an incredible mentorship on the detail side of things out in Japan.
And is there one or two that you can talk about that, again, were kind of eureka moments where you were like, oh, you just like... your back tingled, or that spine moment like, oh my God, I've been doing it wrong the whole way, or why isn't the West doing it this way? Was there one or two that you could, discuss?
Yeah, there's some great examples, some great memories. One of my favorite memories is not so much related to the specifics of being in a bar, but rather about, and I think it is a key thing of hosting, which is about making people feel comfortable. And it's something I encounter as a brand ambassador all the time is, you meet strangers and they might have one expectation or another expectation, but people are often more nervous than we realize. And certainly when I first met Wayno, I was terrified, to be honest, because I'd never met him before. I was the first apprentice he'd ever taken on without having met them in person. So there was felt like a huge responsibility to do a good job, give a good impression of myself, but also of the Birmingham bar community. I was very proud of being a member of the Birmingham bar community and still am. And so I'd seen all these videos. I'd grown up in my career watching him bartend, and he's always dressed impeccably. Beautiful suit, tailored shirt, braces, tie, the most incredible Elvis Presley hairdo you've ever seen. And I was like, okay, I'm going to Japan, new culture. I know business cards are a big deal, so I'll get business cards printed, brilliant. And so it's a long flight to Japan. And so I was wearing just casual clothes, get to the airport. It's really hot. It's like 25, 30 degrees out there, which for a Brit is warm weather and humid. So I was like, no matter, I'm going to put on a 3-piece suit. So I go to just I hadn't flown business. I was young. I was paying my own way. And so I went to the loos, changed into this fancy suit, did my hair, hair gel, get the kind of 1920s look that we had in the hotel that I worked in. So I was really smart, really precise. And when he was picking me up, and he said, I'm going to be 10 minutes late, so go and stand on the terrace and I'll meet you there. I'm standing on the terrace in the blazing sunlight, sweating cobs, really nervous, heart's beating, and I just hear this like sound, and it's the sound of flip-flops. I'm like, blimmin' heck, who's wearing flip-flops in the airport? That's interesting. I turn around, and Wayno turns up in cargo shorts and a Hawaiian shirt, looking at me like, why are you in a suit? We're at the airport, you numpty. And immediately, all of that stress just flowed out of me. And I was like, okay, turns out these, these pinnacle bartenders that we all look up to, they're normal people. They're fun people. They have a sense of humor. And so that was a moment where I kind of immediately reflected, like, it doesn't matter how far you get in this industry, just being human, being yourself, and being relaxed and humble, that can completely change how someone feels entering the industry. They can feel so much more welcome. So that was the first the first moment as soon as I landed.
Now, how about guests? You, as you say, you're a proud member of the Birmingham bar community. What was it like serving more Japanese guests, not more, but Japanese, and that's what I'm assuming were there, as opposed to only tourists, locals and tourists. Was there a difference?
Huge difference. And actually, we weren't really, as Western apprentices, allowed to engage too much with the Japanese guests, unless you were introduced by Ueno because he wanted to tell somebody about you or whatever else. So the hospitality, it's called omotenashi in Japan, this kind of sense of hospitality they have. And a big part of it is about truly and like in a really heartfelt, deep-seated way, understanding the needs of your guests and genuinely, authentically wanting to not only meet those needs, but A, exceed them, and B, exceed them before they realize they're even there. And a big part of people feeling happy in a bar is truly feeling relaxed and at ease. And to feel relaxed and at ease, you need to have someone talking your language, communicating with you in a way you understand. And so generally speaking, the Japanese guests were handled by the Japanese staff, and the Western or tourist guests were looked after by those of us that weren't from Japan. So the main difference that I noticed, besides not being allowed to talk to them, was there was a lot more of almost a sense of ceremony between the guest and the bartender. There was more of a sense of like, we're coming at this as equals. I'm very privileged as a guest to be in your wonderful, famous, incredible bar. And people would sit very straight back, great posture, look the bartender in the eye, really listen carefully to everything they were saying, and engage with it as if they were talking to someone that they really deeply respected. And it was fascinating, really showing the stark contrast of how guests sometimes treat people in Western bars, because the tourists would initially do the same. They'd come in, they'd be a bit boisterous, and you'd see this moment where they went, okay, this is not the right way to behave. There's clearly a different way to behave here. And it was fascinating to watch this sense of the discovery of respect for the cocktail craft, as people might call it, unfolding in the minds of guests. That was really, really cool to see.
Now, how long were you there?
So just one season. I didn't do the whole year or anything like that. I was working unpaid at the time. Wayne was incredibly supportive with helping out with accommodation and everything else. But at that time, I was going out there with my savings and just putting myself through it. So came back, and I had to come back to celebrate my sister's graduation as well. So not as long as I would have liked, but I ran out of money and I had to come home.
Oh, that's too bad. Because I was wondering how long it would take, and maybe you did this in your season, to be deemed good enough, or I don't know if that's the right terminology, but worthy enough to move from a back bar to the front of the bar. Because you see, I've seen the movie about oh God, of course I can't remember his name. Jiro making making sushi. And, his son has been making rice for like 20 years and is never allowed at the front.
Yeah.
Did you feel that you were going to be able to make some drinks while you were there? All right, good. I'm glad you're nodding.
Wayne was an amazing mentor, and you're very quickly, there's nowhere to hide. It's not like a restaurant where you've got a kitchen hidden out the back. So everyone's always on display, and you do have to learn very quickly the right way to hold yourself, to behave. I had this incredible privilege of coming from that luxury hotel background, so knowing just general etiquette points. And both of the mentors I'd had in that hotel were obsessed with Japanese bar culture. So there was a guy called Rob Wood, and there was another guy called Mate Shatlosh. Both of them trained me impeccably. I'm so grateful for those two guys for the things they taught me. So I went into High Five with an understanding of the culture in general and how to act as a bartender in that culture. And so I was very lucky to quite quickly progress from just being allowed to polish glasses and clear glasses, which is where you start, to being allowed to talk to guests, explain the menus. There's no written menu. They've just got like a series of questions they ask you. You have to memorize the questions and how to get the right answers out of people. And then there's a special way of notating it. And then you give that kind of notation to the bartender and they create something bespoke. And so I was very quickly within just a week to progress from kind of bar backing to being able to do that, which is awesome because many people take months to be allowed to do that. And then from there, because I was a geek about whiskey, by that point I already had, I'd tasted like 150 Japanese whiskies before I even arrived, and I tasted another 150 while I was there. Wayno asked me to start kind of teaching some of his team about the history and the flavor profiles of some of these whiskies, not just Japanese, but Scotch and all sorts. And so I was kind of promoted to being allowed to pour whiskey, which was a big deal. And I remember there was, a bartender that I was friends with who'd been there a little bit longer than me. He was looking at me like, that's not fair. How come you're allowed to pour whiskies? I'm not. I was like, just luck, basically. I happen to have expertise in that thing, and I happen to have good jigger technique because I had that hotel background, and those two things got me there. And then once you start pouring whiskey, guests start going, is this guy allowed to make drinks or not allowed to make drinks? And one or two people, the Western guests, would ask me directly, are you allowed to make cocktails? And say, no, that's just the master and just Kiri-san, the head bartender. And then one or two of them over the course of the time I was there would ask, do you mind if he makes us a drink? Actually, we'd love to see what he does. And if a guest asks, then they say yes. And so there were probably like 24 times or so that I made cocktails in the total time I was there, but it felt very special those few times.
I'm sure. Now, when you came home, did you come home thinking, I've got to find me a Japanese company to work for? This is what I want. This is, I'm pure Japan now.
No, not at all. I came back, even more in love with Japan than I had been when I went out there, but very open to what might come next. I knew I wanted to stay in the industry, and I'd had some really interesting chats with a restaurateur in Birmingham who I had a huge amount of respect for. And so as soon as I got back, having had those chats with him beforehand, went and talked to him, got offered a role where I would be basically working alongside him to grow that business. So they were at the time just a pop-up restaurant, and they were moving to a more permanent premises, as well as getting investment to open a second premises that was going to be primarily a cocktail bar. And so from there went to work with him, had this incredible freedom, this creativity, this opportunity to design my own bar from scratch, literally come up with the concept for the bar, basically like opening your own bar, but not the pressure of having to open your own bar. So I had complete conceptual freedom with him, design the menu entirely however I would want it to be, hire my dream team with kind of no real time limit. I had a whole year to prepare and get this dream team together. To this day, incredibly proud of that team. So we built the venue from scratch. Incredibly proud of it. It was one of the best things I think I've ever done. Sadly, died between COVID, me moving to London, and various other factors. But beautiful space. And then it was while I was working there that I got the phone call about Suntory, a couple of years later. And then, I just like, what? I can't turn that down. How often do you get... They'd never had like a full-time House Suntory ambassador before. I was like, right, I need to do this. This is my calling, to go and educate people and mentor people, which is my favorite thing to do in the world.
Well, when you were working at the Wilderness, the bar in Birmingham, now, did you feel that you could bring some of the things that you had learned in Japan to your team?
Yeah, absolutely. One of my favorite things we did was... So we had the Wilderness, which was the fine dining restaurant, and then we opened Nocturnal Animals, which was the cocktail bar. And we built into that bar, kind of like you have chef's tables in great restaurants, we built in a bartender's table, which was behind the back bar. So you'd literally walk kind of through the back bar, and there was a crescent moon shaped table with a bar station built into it. And then so the guests would sit and be observing everything that was going on in the main bar from behind the bartenders. They'd really feel like they were in the bar itself while they were seated. And that meant that I had this opportunity to give a Japanese bartending experience where you're directly in front of that bartender. They make every single drink bespoke for you, and they demonstrate the very finest of techniques with no rush or no need to kind of do things in a shortcutted way. So that was the way in which I brought my experience in Japan to Birmingham, was to go, okay, there's things that are great about Japan that I can do here. There are things that Birmingham wants that are more kind of, looking into the mixology world or doing distillation or various other things. So I was able to bring those two worlds, this passion for kind of the molecular world of cocktails that I'd developed before Japan, and all the stuff I'd learned in Japan, bring it together with my newfound passion for fine dining and that world, and put it into that bartender's table experience. And that was fantastic. That was great fun.
It must have been so satisfying. It must be so... Yeah, pleasing. Now, so then Suntory came, knocked on your door, and we were like, yes, I'm back in my, the what I've created as my safe space, Japan. And were you able to carve out the role, or did they have very specific things that you had to follow, being the first one?
It's a bit of both, really. I wasn't the first brand ambassador that had been employed by the overall company. So there was a Macallan brand ambassador and various other brand ambassadors.
Okay.
But the first working on the House of Suntory. And I had an incredible boss, guy called Nick Templey, and he'd worked at Diageo before, so he'd had a lot of experience with World Class and a huge team of brand ambassadors, and he just immediately put quite a lot of trust in me. So it's like, look, you do have some KPIs, this is your top 12 accounts, you've got to visit there, you've got to train there, etc., etc. But really, we're going to give you some freedom. And I remember coming into role, he was like, right, so your first month, you've got two big things to do. The first is we're taking our 3 most important global customers to Japan, and I need you to come up with the whole itinerary for the trip and make sure it's the best experience they've ever had. And secondly, the week after we come back, it's Taste of London, and we've not planned it yet, but we've got a budget to do something there. You've got a 10 by 10 meter space. Just we need you to make the best experience you can do. And I was super lucky that the trip went really well. They loved it because I was able to introduce them to places I'd been when I lived out there and so on. And Taste of London won the best stand-in show award and best masterclass in show award, the two awards at the Taste of London. And so that was my first month, and immediately all of that stress and will they believe in me? Will I be able to do a good job? Just dissipated, because straight away that all the stakeholders are like, oh, okay, he's all right.
He knows what he's doing.
He's all right. He'll be good. And so from there, I just had this freedom, and that was always something I valued is working in places where I get an element of trust from my team, because as with any bartender, I value my creativity, and I love education. So having the freedom to work out the way that was right for me and that was right for Suntory was invaluable. I'm so grateful for the support they gave me.
Is it that, do you feel that the English know a lot about the Japanese Suntory brands, or is it a real education process?
It's a great question. It's been the defining thing that's made my career exciting, really, is that I always use the same metaphor, which is that I've surfed the wave of Japanese whiskey's popularity. So when I started my career, how old, 14 years ago now, no one really knew about Japanese whiskey. I didn't know about Japanese whiskey. I'd occasionally see a dusty bottle on the shelf, as I did with that Yamazaki 10 back in the day. But it wasn't everyone would say, nah, don't want that, I want Scotch, whatever. And then Suntory, Nikka, various other companies started to win awards. People started to pay attention. I remember when I was working in that hotel bar, we had huge collection. We had one of the biggest collections of Japanese whiskey in Europe at the time. And suddenly, Suntory had won world's best whiskey for the Yamazaki 2013 sherry cask, and guests start coming in and going, oh, that's interesting, what's that, I'll try that actually. And I was just one of the very few people who knew about this stuff and was able to get interviewed on podcasts like this and various trade publications and newspapers and things, just because I was prepared to do it for free, frankly. So I was able to provide some insights that not everyone could, and I wasn't going to charge for it. So I got this kind of slow boost, or quite quick boost, of just being a guy that knew about Japan. And then when it came to the job, it immediately just struck me that people knew a bit, but a lot of it was false. A lot of it was stuff they'd read on blogs. It wasn't stuff that actually had any grounding in the truth, and that we had this huge task to do in terms of just giving good, clear information that had complete truth in its roots. And so I had this cool opportunity, or cool challenge set to me, where we had this thing called the Dojo Masterclass, which had happened in New York, which is where there was an amazing guy called Gardner Dunn, he's the senior brand ambassador in the States, and he'd flown out, Ueno, who was my old boss from High Five, he'd flown him out to New York and done an ice carving masterclass called the Dojo Masterclass, dojo meaning training ground. And so the global guy who was the head of the entree, called Taki, he said, he came to London, he was like, oh, we did this cool thing in New York. I think there's something in it, but we've got a lot going on in New York. Can you just come up with a bigger, broader strategy for what Dojo could be? And at the same time, I had Nick, the guy that was leading the UK team, come to me and say, James, I used to have Diageo World Class back in my old job. I want to do something like that here, on this, something big, something awesome, like Diageo World Class, like a cocktail competition. Can you do it? And I immediately said no. I am not doing another cocktail competition. There are so many cocktail competitions out there. I've competed in half of them, and everyone's sick to death of doing cocktail comps. And so I was like, well, the US guys did a thing on a masterclass on ice carving. Let's combine these two ideas, and let's create something that is just about education, about showing British bartenders all about the truth of Japanese bar culture. And so we built a 6-month program where we would just select, the first year was just 10 people. Now I think it's 100 people per year. But we just selected a small group of people. We did a series of masterclasses where we would learn from traditional Japanese crafts. So we did a proper tea ceremony with a true tea master in a traditional tea room. We did ikebana flower arranging, sushi making, all these incredible things. And we'd learn it from proper experts. I wasn't trying to teach people about these things because I'm not a tea master, I'm not a sushi master, I don't have any authority to talk to them. So we'd learn their craft, and then I would interview them in front of the guests about the kind of philosophies, the underlying principles that define how they consider themselves good at their jobs, and ask them, which of these things do you think are applicable to the world of bartending? And then we would draw out these kind of key learnings from traditional crafts and think, what does that mean for our jobs? So with my favorite example is always the ikebana, the flower arranging. And we'd learn about, the concept of ma, which is a Japanese concept similar to minimalism or the importance of negative space or white space in design. And there's a whole, I won't go into it, it's like an hour-long presentation. There's a whole plethora of beautiful stuff that you can learn about the concept of beauty. And so we would take those learnings and then we'd say, well, what does that mean for garnishing? And so we built out this program that was just a series of cool masterclasses about Japanese culture, how it applies to bartending, and then we'd just basically test ourselves, and we'd pick a classic cocktail per person at the beginning of the program, and every single time we met up, we would get those classic cocktails out, and we would take our learnings and we'd refine that drink. Because in Japan, you select one classic cocktail for your signature as a bartender. And your whole career, you're refining and defining the best version of that cocktail. So for Ueno, it's his famous White Lady. For Kishi at Star Bar, it's the sidecar. And so every bartender had that classic drink that they would slowly refine. And by the end of it, you had a group of 10 people who not only were hugely close friends after spending this whole 6-month period together, they were proper experts in Japanese culture. They knew our brands back to front. They understood the culture really well. And they had this perfect classic that they'd spent months refining. And so that was the kind of core way of educating the bartenders of Britain. And we're now rolling that out. I think we're aiming to do 10 countries next year. We did 5 countries this year.
Oh my God, I want to do that. That sounds so fabulous. That's such an incredible program. So do you have your signature cocktail?
Well, I've done a few now because every year I kind of set myself one to kind of challenge myself as I go through. But while I was out in Japan, they got me doing the penicillin because Milk and Honey was one of the bars I had huge respect for, and it was a favourite cocktail of mine at the time. And being as I was the kind of the token Brit behind the bar, they were like, right, well that uses Scotch, that's the one for you. So while I was in Japan, that was the one that I worked on.
And slowly, from Compass, it became one of your whiskeys.
Yeah, well,
right?
exactly. Of course, I mean, I've made it with countless different whiskies over the years. The drink
sure.
that I make the most regularly now is I've got a kind of gentle twist on a Boulevardier, which I call the umami. So I do that with Toki whiskey, equal parts, of course, with Campari and some sweet vermouth. And I just add half a bar spoon of tomato ponzu, and the umami and the acidity basically just bring. I find sometimes with the kind of Amaro-based drinks that you get these flavour spikes, and they can be nice, but I think they do benefit from a little bit of softening around the edges, and so that ponzu, the tomato ponzu, just softens the bitterness against the intensity of the alcohol and the kind of spice notes of the vermouth.
Oh my God, that sounds so good. I can make it right now. But first, we now I don't want to talk about lockdown a lot, but what I love that you did, and I want people to go into your Instagram because they're still on there, is that literally, hold on, let me look. It was from March 26th. That must have been the first week or the second week of lockdown, and it was 2020, that you started to pick a concept, kind of every day for a while, a Japanese concept, and go through it for like 10 or 15 minutes. And, when lockdown happened, that was so quick to, even get around to do anything. I mean, did you find that people were really, taking these to heart or responding well to them?
Yeah, it was amazing. And I think I wouldn't have this global job now had I not had the amazing support of and at this place it's the internet, right? So anyone can join the international bar community of listening to what I had to say. There's no real reason people should listen to me. I'm just some random British guy, but people came along, and it started with a couple of these Instagram videos, and I got so many requests to do like a deeper dive that I started something called the Dojo Lockdown Lessons. And so I ran this every fortnight for like a year and a half. Had something like 400 people do it from around the world, and that sounds like 400 people on the internet, that's nothing. But if I tell you it was a 5-hour course over a week, so every day we would meet at the same time, and I'd change up the time of day each week that I did it, and we would meet up on Zoom, and I would present every day for 1 hour on a different topic related to Japanese bars, Japanese history. So it was an hour on the full history of Japanese whiskey, and I used to do some stuff with Nika, and I've had a long fascination with the wider drinks industry in Japan. So I didn't just focus on Suntory. I was like, look, let's just take the brand stuff away. Let's just focus on the true history from every side. Hour on an in-depth dive into the history of Japan, an hour on distillation science, and I had a friend of mine who's a qualified chemist join the first few so I could learn from them, and then just presented on the detailed geeky stuff on pot and column distillation. Then we did a session on what was it that we did next? I can't remember at this stage, but exploring all the different brands, one exploring bar culture, and there was, as I say, this 5-hour course, and to get just shy of 500 people doing that over a year and a half, it just gave me such confidence that I wasn't just some silly randomer. I actually had something to say, and it just, that was one of the cool moments for me, I think, in this brand ambassador career.
And part of me is happy that you can't remember. It means it was a while ago.
We're finally,
thank goodness.
The cobwebs are forming on COVID.
It is. Now, I know we've spoken for a long time, but there's something that I also brought up at the beginning that I really wanted to touch on, was how you feel about being the perfect host. And I heard in one interview that you did, this was a while back, but you were in your position already, that there were 3 things that you thought made up a perfect host, which I want you to tell me, because it's better if they hear it from you. And also if that has changed in the years that you've been doing this job.
Right. So I think the 3 things you're referring to is something I used to use when I was training bartenders. And so I used to do quite a bit of consulting, and we've talked a bit about the background. There's lots of other things that came during that career. And when I was training teams, this was always a framework that I used to use, which was the holy trinity of bartending.
Right.
And it was a funny one, because oftentimes I would go in as a consultant, or I would be hiring new staff, whatever else, and my reputation was being the cocktail guy, right? And they'd be like, oh, teach us this new distillation technique, or like, how do you use that centrifuge, or whatever thing it would be. And I would always start my trainings saying, right, we're going to get to the flavor stuff, but before we do, let's get the basics down. And so I said, there's 3 things that matter in bars, in cocktail bars specifically, because they're not just going to get drunk, in which case they'd go to like a nightclub. They're not just going for the most complex thing they can get for the price, because they'd probably go to a wine bar. And they're not just looking for a sense of community, they'd go to the pub. There's something unique about cocktail bars that people want. And I said, well, 3 things come at that for me, the holy trinity of bartending. The first is, like, you must make great drinks, of course. The second is, there's got to be some sort of show to it. There's some sort of experience that comes around that. That's the beautiful things about a cocktail bar, is you go, not only is the music and the vibe great, but you're watching someone do a thing. It's like, it's a performative element to it. But the third and most important is the art of hospitality, the art of hosting. And the reason it's the most important is if you take these 3 things, great drinks, great show, and great hospitality, you can mess up the other 2 and fix it with the hospitality. But if you mess up the hospitality, you can't fix it with the 2. So if I make a drink that's a bit unbalanced, it doesn't matter. If I've given them a great experience and I'm lovely, I just apologise and I say, no worries, let me get you something else. And it's fine. Like, literally no one remembers that. We've all had bad drinks and forgotten that we had bad drinks. You've got the other one where you might be doing some flair. You throw a bottle up in the air, smashes everywhere. Great host, I used to do this all the time. I'd mess up my flair and I'd just do a big old grin, look around the room, and then do a huge dramatic theatrical bow. And people would giggle, they'd have a good laugh. Oh, this guy has a sense of humour, he knows he messed up. Ha ha ha. And that actually improves their experience. And that hosting means that you're forgiven for messing up the show that they were seeing. But if you're rude and you leave a bad taste in someone's mouth, you're scuppered. And so my whole career, I've seen some. There was a woman that I used to work with called Kate. I have never seen someone host the way that Kate does. And so very early on, I was like, that's the magic. That's the secret sauce. And so every person I've trained, every job I've been in, giving the very best hospitality has been my biggest passion.
And do you think that not that those three have changed, but do you think the manner in which you are a host has changed now, having been in Japan?
I think so. I think something I really learned from Ueno in Japan and from lots of different bartenders in Japan is the sense of, you don't have to be diminishing yourself in any way. You don't have to be self-deprecating. You can be really kind of proud of who you are and what your career path is, your craftsmanship is, but still doing it in a way that's like very, very humble and very much on a kind of equal basis with your guest, and very calm as well. It doesn't have to be hectic and frantic. And whilst I never thought I was frantic before, I definitely was quite high energy, and I'm still high energy now to a degree. But I think when I'm hosting, I try and like do a breathing exercise before I start, calm myself down, because that lends credibility and it lends a sense of, I guess, gravitas to the way that people perceive you, and that means that you end up having that more honest, equal, human interaction rather than one of guest and server.
Well, that's fabulous. I can't wait to go to Japan now. So why don't you tell me a little bit more about the House of Suntory and some of the brands?
Absolutely. So the coolest thing for me about the House of Suntory is it is the founding house of Japanese whiskey. So Yamazaki was the first ever whiskey distillery in Japan. And the guy that founded it, Shinjiro Tori, he'd had a background in selling whiskies, in blending, and he'd realized really early on that the palate of Japanese people was a little bit different to the palates of Westerners. So he'd tried selling Western style wines and people had found them too heavy, too intense. And so the style of spirits that he created when he opened Yamazaki, later, Hakushu and various other distilleries, was to make a style of spirit that was subtle, refined, yet complex. And so anytime you're tasting a Suntory whiskey, and indeed, to be honest, many other Japanese whiskies, because he was the first guy and people followed suit from what he was doing, you tend to find that sense of subtlety, i.e. it's less intense, it's more refined, by which we mean that there's no one flavour that super overpowers everything else. It's much more focused on a sense of balance and harmony. And finally, complexity. We always aim for the maximum complexity. And I'd always wondered until I first went to Japan, like how that's actually achieved, because it's, certainly the whiskies are made exactly the same way as they're made in Scotland. So how do they do that? And it turns out that there's this three kind of pillared structure we call the pillars of Suntory. The first is the idea of wa. So wa it's actually the original name of Japan, but it means harmony. So things like wagyu beef, Japanese beef. So gyu being beef, wa being Japanese beef, right? Washi paper, which is the paper we use to make our labels.
Yeah.
So wa is about being inspired by the nature and harmony of Japan, and the harmony between Japanese people and Japanese nature. So that really comes through in the terroir. So in Hakushu, for example, there's really interesting natural yeasts in the air, and just the general microculture of Japan. I'm not very good at the science side of things, but like something about the location of the Hakushu in the forest, the high altitude, gives a unique profile through fermentation and through aging. And so trying to reflect those natural influences in the spirits is a key part, and that's the wa element. The second is the idea of monozukuri, which is a craftsmanship approach in Japan. And for us, that means simultaneously respecting tradition and keeping things as traditional as possible, whilst also looking at innovation. And the way that's largely been done is too many things I could talk about in this interview, but the key thing is a concept of tsukurawaki. It's a very hard Japanese word, but tsukurawaki means producing lots of different styles of whiskey in that one location by changing up the production methods. So we'll use different varieties of yeast which create different flavors. We'll use different types of peat which create different aromas, or different barley strains. The most important one arguably is the still shapes. We've got 16 unique still shapes at both Yamazaki and Hakushu. And those create, again, different profiles. 6 different types of cask we use. And it's not for finishing, it's aged in that cask throughout its life. And so you get much more intensity of that flavour. And so in any of our distilleries, you're producing dozens of flavour profiles, dozens of different styles, and then the blenders will take all those styles and bring them together into something that is more subtle, refined and complex. And so that's the kind of, with the whiskies at least, that's the monozukuri elements. And the final part is omotenashi, giving great experiences, because not everyone gets to come to Japan, so we're wanting to give people a taste of Japan in every sip they have, but also when they meet people like me, brand ambassadors, when they meet any of our teams, come to our events, giving people an authentic experience of Japan, because we're the first. We want to represent Japan well. Suntory, Tori is the family name. sun is the land of the rising sun. It's come first and foremost for us as being truly Japanese. And so that's why this year, like celebrating the 100th anniversary of whiskey making, we've been doing this series of events, partnered obviously with, you know, Keanu Reeves, Sofia Coppola, but it's not about those celebrity partnerships. It's about giving a true experience of Japan, making sure that the details of what is it like to be in Japan are spot on, that the incense you're burning is a real Japanese incense, that when you arrive you get the oshibori hand towel that reminds you of being in Japan, that you don't have to like put your handbag on the table next to you, because in Japan that's not what you do. There's a little handbag stand that they come and give you, and you put your handbag on the handbag stand. All of those little elements of hospitality that you experience in Japan coming through in the way we activate. So that's been a fun part of the year, is celebrating the 100th year anniversary and giving people a true experience of what makes us Suntory, which is that respect for Japanese nature, that craftsmanship, that monozukuri, and finally that omotenashi, like really understanding, experiencing the true side of Japanese culture.
You know, that sounds amazing. The distillery with all those different stills.
Yeah, I mean, it's fascinating. And it's amazing how they've taken the whiskey expertise and played it through with other spirits. So you've got, Roku gin and Haku vodka now. You know, making gin since the 1930s, vodka since the 1950s. And throughout that, they've always been, I say, respecting tradition, but trying to find innovative ways to make it better. And that concept of making lots of different styles to produce a better product, it plays through even in those. So in Roku, normally you'd have a gin still, you'd take your botanicals, you'd put them all in together, dried botanicals normally, distill them, and that's your gin made. At Roku, they're like, well, actually it turns out that fresh ingredients taste better than dried ingredients, so we're only going to distill fresh ingredients, and we're only going to distill them in the peak of their season. And not only that, different shaped stills are better for different fresh botanicals. So we're going to have 4 different types of pot still, and we're going to distill them depending on which pot still brings out the best flavours from that botanical. With Haku, they've got rice, but they've gone, the problem with column stills, they can strip a lot of flavour out. So we use 2 different types of column still. This type of column still creates a really clean type. This one creates a really full-bodied flavour. So we'll do both, and then we'll blend them to get the best flavour. And so that constant approach of going, we're going to do it the most traditional way, but we're also going to give ourselves the opportunity to create the perfect end product. And that means doing lots of different things, focusing on the details, and then bringing those different styles together through the art of blending to create that perfect, subtle, refined, yet complex spirit.
You know, I thought going to Japan, I feel you discussing how everything is made, that it's also going to be kind of sensational, as in using all my senses. I never thought about that before. And now when I take a sip, I sound like a commercial really, but when I take a sip now, it will be in a totally different way than I would have had you not told me that.
I hope so.
So
you're going to have the best time. Honestly.
I can't wait. It's like I got to go and try something right now. No. So thank you.
My pleasure.
I always finish by asking 2 questions. And one is, I'm going to start with the top tips for the home bartender, because we have a lot of home bartenders that listen to the show. And maybe it's something that's, very Jamesy, also very Japanesey, or if you have a few of them.
Yeah, I mean, I've as with everyone, I have 1,001 tips for home bartenders. But I think the number one thing for me would be to trust your own instincts when it comes to flavour. So you can train your palate. That's, of course, you can train yourself to enjoy the quote unquote correct balance when it's like the right amount of sweet and sour. If you prefer it more sour than the cocktail recipes you're finding, or you prefer it sweeter than the cocktail recipes you're finding, that's fine. Like, pursue the things that you enjoy would be the number one tip. And the other side, that's more practical, is keeping things cold really helps. So that means put as much ice in the glass as you can. Get larger ice blocks if you can. They don't necessarily have to be the huge ones that you fill up your entire glass, but the difference between one that's 1 inch across versus 1.5 inches, 2 inches across is quite huge. So keeping things cold, glassware in the fridge, even if it's only ideally the freezer, even if you've got space, even if it's only for a minute before you serve it, just takes the kind of ambient heat out of that glass and means that your cocktail will stay perfect for a little bit longer. So those are two small tips.
Fabulous. Now, last question. If you could be anywhere drinking anything, where would that be and what would you be drinking?
Well, given that we've talked a lot about Japan, let's do a bar in Japan. I have so many bars that I adore. But one that stands out for me is a bar called... It's just one of those, like, do you want to give away your secrets? This place is not really a secret bar, but it's one that's less well known by the bar community. It's one called Grandfather's in Shibuya. you should definitely go while you're out there. And it's, if not the original, it's one of the original vinyl bars out in Tokyo. And it's underground. It's quite tricky to find because the sign is like, it isn't, the sign that says grandfathers is not particularly easy to read, so it's easy to walk past it. But it's got this quite dark, quite sexy, but very relaxed decor to it. And then the staff are super friendly, but in a way that kind of leaves you to have your own space. So you just sit down, you order, you generally order a whole bottle. It's a bottle keep system. So you get a bottle of, Kakabin is what I normally get. And that sits on your table. They bring you this really old school kind of Victorian china bowl full of blocks of ice and a pair of tongs, and then just soda waters when you need them. And you can either sip it neat, put a rock in it, or as I tend to drink it, as a highball, and you just sit and just listen. Like, the guy curates the most incredible selection of music, and it's obviously on the most amazing hi-fi system, beautiful, well-preserved vinyl, and just creates this wonderful, wonderful atmosphere. And if he likes you, you can request songs. So it ticks a lot of boxes.
Thank you so much for sharing that. I know sometimes it's really hard to give away your secrets, so that I really appreciate that. Well, thank you so much for being on the show. It's been so amazing.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, and sorry it's taken so long, but it's so good to finally have a chance to chat properly.
As I said, some things are meant to take a long time, and I think it was the perfect timing.
Amazing. Let me know anywhere you need in Japan. I'm happy to share recommendations.
Thank you so much. You've just said that out to the world, so you may be getting a lot of Instagram.
Well, that's fine. I'm easy to find.
All right, dear. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
You
Bye.
too.